Hi, I'm Debbie Atuk. I'm a Bering Straits Native Corporation shareholder and a portfolio specialist for Skyview Investment Advisors. Welcome to this series of interviews that I'm doing to discuss the opportunities and challenges of business development in Alaska. Economic opportunities are always top of mind for the Alaska Native corporations and their shareholders, but major energy and infrastructure projects in rural Alaska require serious capital. Raising that is a challenge and can require some creative strategies. Funding sometimes comes from federal sources as well as state, but it can also come from private investment, as well as the Native corporations themselves, and often a combination of all three. Hugh Short, who co-founded PT Capital and is its chairman and CEO, is no stranger to raising capital and investing on behalf of shareholders. As an Inupiaq and former mayor of Bethel, Alaska, he's also quite familiar with Alaska Native corporations, their missions, goals, limitations, and the power in numbers. Hugh is my guest today. Thank you for being here today, Hugh. So first, I thought that we would start off with the kinds of opportunities that you see that Alaska Native corporations have in terms of investing, maybe not necessarily in funds, but are there other opportunities that they can look at, like startups? And I think you need to hit unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
All right. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you putting these together. This is I've watched pretty much all of your episodes so far, and I'd say hopefully we don't see a ratings drop after me. Before me.
I'm sure we won't. I think people in Alaska are really interested in the topic that you're a homegrown expert in. This is something that I'm particularly interested in, yeah. I know. So I think that your ratings will be great. So I know you were on mute there for a second. So I keyed us up with talking about the kinds of opportunities that the AMCs have. And just as background, and I know that you probably already know this, but one of the reasons why I'm doing this is to look ahead to try to help some of the smaller AMCs think about opportunities for creating income, especially after, if you watched the episode with Nathan McCowan, we talked about what will happen when 7J funding slows down. So that's
you know,
really
I sent him a note after I watched that, and just saying I thought it was a great interview. And I think there's an immense opportunity. I think for the smaller AMCs or the village corporations, I think it's really it really comes down to a scale problem. You've got three challenges you need to overcome. I think the first is, if you're a smaller AMC, you just have less capital to invest. And so with less capital, your opportunities to your second challenge, which is you got a smaller level and landscape of investment opportunities. And I think the third challenge is really the talent pool for your investments, the operating partners that you bring to the table, sort of who you bring into leadership positions within those companies that you invest into. If you're a small AMC, being able to actually scale into an investment that provides sustainable, achievable dividends and a return is super challenging. And if you're in that position, really looking to invest into Alaska, Alaska has its own challenges right now. If you overlay COVID on what was here previously, we had a low commodity price in oil.
Right. And some people think that I think they just don't quite remember, but some people think that caused the drop in oil pricing, but that was actually predated. The oil prices crashed with Iran and Russia, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there was a slight recovery last year. Then it softened towards the end of the year, and then COVID hit, and then we saw negative oil prices. And that's really stressed.
Right, paying tankers to take oil shipments. Unbelievable.
And then you put that stress on top of the state of Alaska, who's in a position right now where 90% or more of their budget is built on oil and oil revenues, oil royalties. So you just look at a very challenging landscape. Now you introduce COVID, One of our best examples of opportunity was tourism prior to COVID.
Right. And that's,
2020,
I'm
2020
sorry,
is not going to be a great year for tourism.
2020 is a wash. Did you say 2021?
I think 2021 is going to be a challenge. I think if you look at the timeline for a vaccine, a timeline for airlines to recover, 80% of Alaska's tourists come on cruise ships. Until the people feel safe to travel on cruise ships, we're not going to see, 2019 levels, for 3, 4, 5 years, probably. And so it's going to be a slow recovery. So you have those challenges, and I don't mean to be a pessimist, but that's the landscape that you're looking at in August of 2020. And so as a small ANC, you already had the challenges previously. You have 7J, which over the course of the next decade is likely to reduce significantly. And which means you need to, in my opinion, you need to collaborate. You need to start finding partners and looking for opportunities together.
And so, Hugh, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that's something that I've been thinking a lot about. I think, I came up to, right now I'm based in New York, and I've been traveling up to Alaska quite a bit. And last year when I was working on launching that fund, we had a conversation, Barings Bank and Nathan, we were talking about what some of those opportunities might be like if you could get a couple of smaller Native corporations to cooperate. I mean, do you think, I don't know to what extent they, in my opinion, JVs rarely work. So I almost think that they need to consider a merger model rather than a JV, although mergers often don't work either. So when you talk about collaborating on how do you see this working, knowing how these are small communities with boards that sometimes don't always get along with each other, let alone with maybe somebody in the community who's like on the tribal side, and they have funding available through tribal funding sources. So I feel like we have a lot of challenges in looking at ways to kind of pool resources. And I think there's the income that the ANCs have, but then also we shouldn't overlook the fact that there can be some federal or state funding, like USDA has funding for infrastructure projects, but you have to have an ANC that's able to work well with its tribal partner.
Yeah. Well, any successful investment is going to start with someone who has deep knowledge in that space. So you just pick the space: tourism, aviation, logistics. You need an operating partner who you can build trust with. And for any ANC to invest into a company, really starts with trust. And you got to be able to have a level of trust. I think the other challenge that needs to be overcome is if you're going to collaborate capital into an investment, being able to actually underwrite, understand a business, understand the strengths, the weaknesses, put a business case together, constructing sort of how much equity does this business need, how much debt can you put into this company, and how quickly do you want to grow it? Do you want to grow it, or is it a business that you just want to, run and have a healthy level of dividends? There's a lot of questions to ask to be able to do it. Structurally, private equity has been built upon a 5 or 10-year fund where you invest into, you're an LP, a limited partner. You have a GP, a general partner, who makes investment decisions. And at the end of the fund, they generally sell those positions, and the fund life ends. I think what's interesting, what you're starting to see in family offices, is all evergreen funds, where you invest into a fund, you hire a manager who manages your portfolio. It could be one company, it could be multiple companies, and there's really no termination of that. The business is managed for the long term, for years, decades. The business is built around a longer timeline, and perhaps that fits a lot better with the native corporation timeline. And it really allows smaller village corporations, smaller investors to be more cautious, to stair step into an investment portfolio. And obviously we're not going to solve board members. I'm a shareholder of Bering Straits as well, and Chalista Corporation, Sitnasaw Corporation, Bethel Native Corporation. Native corporations have their own inherent challenges. I mean, they're built on a democratic platform of elections. But over the period of time, I think there's an opportunity to really pool that capital, stair step into an investment environment, and at that point, really get the scale. Because it's hard if you're sitting in a small village, or if you're sitting in an office space in Anchorage and you're managing a portfolio for a small village in Alaska. It's isolating, it's challenging, and you really don't have the resources to be able to take advantage of the opportunities in many cases.
So Hugh, one of the things that strikes me after you've covered quite a bit of ground here, and I feel like what you covered, we could talk about over the length of an afternoon and doing like a webinar, at some point post-COVID, we'll do this in person. And that was my ideal. But you talked about stair stepping. But before we get to that point of putting money into a fund, what about the ability for a small native corporation to be considered an accredited investor? Is that a challenge in your opinion?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that if you have, I think the hardest, before you even get there, you need an opportunity. The hardest part about investing is actually finding investments. That's the challenge, is how do you identify a good investment?
Well, okay, let me stop you there for one quick second, because I've had the opportunity to be able to look at investments in one of my previous positions, right? There's no shortage of investment opportunities if you're willing to look at some really, really crazy stuff, but really finding a good investment. And that goes back to the thing that you were talking about earlier. A smaller native corporation may not have the depth or the ability to hire somebody full time. So how do they field? How do they look for and sift out the bad opportunities from the good opportunities?
You need a team. I mean, that's the challenge. You need a bench that, you have financial analysts, you've got operational experts, you've got deep sector understanding. And you can only do that if you are, putting a team together. And that's why I think there really needs to be some collaboration that comes together for deal identification. Startups and native corporations generally don't go well together. Right. Startups a lot of them fail. And most native corporations are run on a very conservative investment platform. And so if you're going to go out and look for small startup companies to invest in, many of them are going to fail, 50, right. 70%. And that, the tolerance for that at a board level, at an ANC, in my experience, is not huge. Right. So you're looking.
And in terms of being a responsible investor and having the board be responsible about overseeing their fiduciary responsibilities, you would only allocate a certain portion of your
certain portion. So then you're looking at more stable, mature companies. They have a track record. They've got revenue that goes back. They've got an ability to project out. They've got assuming an executive team in place. And so you're looking at acquisitions. So you're starting to get the box smaller and right. smaller and smaller. And then, let's say you have a specific interest in logistics. Well, then you have a smaller area. And at that point, you should probably go out and look for partners who would like to come along with you. And once you find a target, I think at that point, back to your original question about accredited investors, it's as simple as setting up an LLC and going out and pursuing that and structuring it. So I think the investment collaboration needs to begin with a group of investors who feel comfortable with each other and have similar investment tolerance and similar investment interests. And if you can put those folks together in the same room, pull your capital together, and then find the best people to go out and fill that order for you and help you identify, okay, is company A, B, or C the right fit for us? Well, all right, go out, look at it, put a business case together, report back to us, let us know what you think. And I think at that point, you've got a team that perhaps you can help reduce the risk, because it's a risky business. Investing it's not a sure thing.
Right, exactly. I mean, every disclaimer that you see, they certainly are there's no guarantee, right? I mean, there's so many statistics about how many businesses that start up that will fail. And we know from the venture capital world, they take a portfolio approach. They put together 20, 30 companies into their portfolio. And those are vetted. Those are after they've screened hundreds of business plans, if not 1,000. I mean, it takes a lot. Yeah. Like you said, it takes a bench of people and quite a lot of grunt work by the analysts to make sure that they've looked at everything before you even get near a due diligence.
And then to your latter point about other capital, so Barings in their Alaska Future Fund, right? Perfect example of, hey, we have an interest, we're indigenous, we have a group of investors who are interested, and you reach out to a fund like that, then they have the ability to bring some substantial capital to the table, sponsored by the Alaska Permanent Fund, and you're able to go out and put pieces of a deal together. And in many cases, it's really just trying to figure out, is this a 5-year investment for you? Is this a 10-year investment for you? Do you need to be in and out in 2 or 3 years? And in many cases, that's a great screener as to, how do you put your partners together? Because in a capital stack, there's often opportunity to be able to be creative in how you put that together.
Well, let's talk about that in particular, if you don't mind switching gears a little bit to talk about some of the larger projects that are still going to happen in Alaska, even in a down economy. We have infrastructure projects that are out there that can be done. Something that, Nathan, he's such a great resource for topics. Maybe it wasn't Nathan, but somebody recently brought up toll roads. Have toll roads been looked at in Alaska?
There's been some private roads built primarily to service the oil industry. Red Dog Mine, that's essentially a toll road. Okay. Ada built it, and they charge a toll per ton of zinc. So it's a fairly tried and true way to get infrastructure built. Recently, I just read an article where I think it was one of the explorers up north was working with Ada to have Ada sponsor the construction of roads and necessary infrastructure to support additional oil to be developed. So I think there's opportunities. I think the advantage that a village corporation has, if it's in your own backyard, is you own the land, and you conceivably have a great relationship with your regional corporation, and they own the land as well, surface and subsurface. Right. And that gives you an advantage as to, if you want to go out and sponsor a project. I was just talking with a friend of mine that is in a leadership position up north. If that village corporation actually went out, sponsored an investment vehicle, has a strategic position to actually place an investment and bring capital along with that, there's actually a huge opportunity for village corporations to do that on natural resource development. You've got Donlin Creek, Pebble, up north in Bering Straits region. You've got Port Clarence and Cape Spencer. So you've got a lot of different projects. A lot of those are long lead, but I will tell you, probably the easiest place and where most of the capital today is looking for infrastructure investments that yield multi-decade investment income and are stable and provide investors, very little volatility.
So you think that we have projects like that are in the pipeline, so to speak, no pun intended, but
yeah.
The ones that you mentioned, like the deep water ports, that's something that's kind of been on the docket now for a couple of our different regions within the state, particularly on the northwest coast and all the way up around Ukiavik. So how do you hear anything about that, or about whether or not there's going to be able to be a series of ports, or do you think it'll just be like winner take all? There'll be one deep water port servicing Coast Guard and any other, I don't know.
Yeah, the basis for a deep water port, you're going to get some level of grant money, federal money, but any money is going to require private money to go in.
Right.
And so that means that those investors are going to be looking for a return. That means that you're likely going to have to put some debt into it to help finance it. And all of that is precipitated with revenue. And so where does the revenue come from? And, that's the question. So you need to have
your business case.
That's what you have to build in the business case. So, Port of Nome, Point Spencer, all of those have the opportunity for natural resource development in the Seward Peninsula. But you have to work closely with those explorers who are in the mining sector to be able to develop that business case. As you can do, I think you can depend on some level of support from the military, and perhaps there are one-off projects where you can get, most of the revenue through a long-term military lease. But I think that the infrastructure development is many years. I mean, I was the chairman of ADA in 2011 to 2015. A lot of those projects I was working on in 2011 are still being worked on. And
I believe that.
It's almost a decade later. They've moved along the way, and so there's been progress.
Right.
So, but those are going to be the linchpins for future, operating company investments. Whether it's, there's a deep water port, you need fuel. Who provides the fuel? You need an airport. Who provides airport services? You just go down the list of what's necessary to support an infrastructure development, and it's a huge amount of jobs and operating revenue.
Well, I feel like we've covered quite a bit, and yet we could talk for much longer. Other challenges and opportunities for the AMCs in Alaska. We've talked a lot about this already, but is there anything else that I think you started with the biggest challenge, which is we're taking a hit, I should say, in tourism. So that's unfortunate. Anything positive?
I look at this, you have a choice every day. You wake up and either you're going to be an optimist or a pessimist. And I think it's a survival for the career I've chosen to be an optimist. Right now, there's great companies to invest into that. If you're looking at a decade out, we don't know how long tourism is going to take to rebound. We do know it's going to rebound. We do know Alaska is an amazing place. People are not going to want to stop traveling to Alaska.
That's right.
We've got some of the best glaciers in our portfolio at PT Capital. We've got a company called Alpine Air Alaska,
which I'm looking forward to visiting while I'm up there in a few weeks.
Yeah, and you're able to go on a glacier. You're able to see things that you cannot see anywhere else in the world. And from an investment standpoint, we're in a time and place right now where valuations are down.
Right. So that is
positive. That is a positive. And so if you have dry powder, if you have capital to invest, and that's a space you're interested in, right now is an exciting time. Wake up every day, you're looking for great companies to invest in with great management teams who, maybe need a little bit of capital. And prior to COVID, they were doing just fine, right? Today,
Right.
hey, maybe I should pick up the phone and talk to Hugh. So that's the opportunity. I think the other opportunity is as a father of a 22-year-old daughter, just shout out to Dartmouth, graduated from Dartmouth.
Ooh.
There's a lot of young kids coming back to Alaska who think completely different than an old guy like me. And so they're coming up with creative ways. You look at the remote work culture right now. It's possible for companies that previously were just based in Seattle and New York to say, hey, you want to live in Alaska, you can live in Alaska. You need a great internet connection. Our teams, dispersed all over the U.S. And
That's fantastic.
It's a new world that we live in, and I think that there's huge opportunity to figure out how to be very successful in it.
I want to end on one last thing about infrastructure that we haven't talked about, and that is the last mile for high-speed internet in rural Alaska, and particularly with regards to education and how are our kids in Alaska, in rural Alaska, going to fare during this school year if they don't have access to high-speed internet? And what's the next what's going to be the next solution? Like, what's coming up that's going to help us to get lower cost, high-speed internet to the rural villages? Do you have any insight into that? Do you have that in your portfolio at all? Are you looking at that?
We're 50% owners in a telecommunications company in Iceland. And our company is I think we're the number one consumer of a government-owned fiber network that provides fiber to 98% of Iceland residents. Their strategy was to essentially build the fiber and lease it out to private companies. In the United States, it's a much different business case. Here, the government provides long-term support through schools and clinics. So if you have a school or you have a clinic, you can go out and buy capacity. But generally, the government's not in the business of building middle mile to towns. So in Alaska, the landscape today is GCI, who's got Terra. You got Quintillion, who's built an offshore fiber network and terrestrial to Deadhorse. But you have a huge digital divide, and it's a huge problem because there's kids in villages 10 miles apart. One has high-speed internet, the other does not. And so being able to provide that next iteration of high-speed broadband, Elon Musk is working on low orbit satellites.
Right.
OneWeb, which went through bankruptcy, but then came out of bankruptcy, is now partnering to do low orbit satellites in Alaska, which cover huge swaths of rural Alaska. There's new technology being put in place that I think will, to a certain extent, democratize the ability for smaller villages to access broadband. But today it's have and have not. You got haves in urban Alaska, and you got some haves and a lot of have nots in rural Alaska. And with COVID, it's only punctuated this digital divide and will set some communities back a year, and those kids and other places, they're probably going to be just fine.
Right. It's to me, it's worrisome. In the first place, pre-COVID, we have communities that don't have access to high-speed internet at home. They have it at school, but they don't have it at home. So it does make a difference for kids, for our kids. So that's something that was already on my radar, but now with COVID and so many kids needing to stay at home, I just worry about how much that sets them back. And one of my one of the things that I particularly value is making sure that we have a way for people to choose to stay at home if they, if you want to raise your kids in a rural community. I think we should have that option, but we need to be able to provide high-speed internet for kids to be able to be considered competitive in the workforce, competitive at higher ed, if that's something that they choose to do. So it's just one of the things I just wanted to ask you what you might know about what's coming down the pipeline with getting that.
Yeah,
that
the U.S. has taken a much different approach to sort of providing broadband to every one of its residents, and it's it does create the system, but
maybe like you said, the low orbit satellites, maybe that will help. And maybe somebody like your daughter is going to team up with the team and bring somebody up to from Dartmouth, one of the Thayer engineers. They'll come out and figure out something.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sitting here and talking about all of this. I'm looking forward to the time when we can have an actual in-person seminar, and I hope that you'd be able to come up to Nome and meet with people face-to-face and talk about more in depth with some of the stuff we covered at a very high level today, but really good stuff, talking about there is an opportunity out there. You need to work with a good team. I feel like this has been a great discussion, but just the beginning, if people are considering expanding their portfolio into private equity.
Well, keep up the work. This is a great forum, and you're providing content to people who generally, this is tough content to find. So keep up the good work, and
thanks, Hugh.
Stay safe.
Yes, you too. And I hope to see you and everybody else in a few weeks when we travel up to Alaska.
Sounds good.
All right.
Take care.
Bye-bye.